Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on another podcast. And today I've got Ali with me, Ali Habasha. Ali and I have worked together on, in fact, Ali's last 2 assignments, I believe. So he certainly worked for us twice. One with a decent size family-owned business with a charismatic and dynamic, good CEO, about 300 million turnover, I think. And the other one was in private equity for another business, again, few hundred million turnover, but really fragmented business that had been built through buy and build and organic growth. Again, another dynamic company and owned by private equity that you would recognize. And we've been together today to talk about sales forecasting. I think in particular sales forecasting right now is really, really important, given the fact that some people are talking about softer numbers. But before we get into that, Ali, why don't you say hi and introduce yourself and give people a bit of background about yourself?
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be on the podcast. Well, I'm a principal data scientist. I've been in the industry for almost 2 decades now. I've started obviously with kind of as you can imagine as a data analyst, and I grew into kind of more consultative and more strategical roles, but I still retained my analytical background, and I am trained in mathematics and statistics. So I predominantly work with business-to-business organizations, those who are undergoing considerable transformation, those who want to kind of use data and analytics in order to not just deliver descriptive analytics, but also prescriptive analytics for their commercial teams, for their marketing departments. You can think about next best action, all of those interesting things. And projects that I work on involve substantial amounts of sales forecasting, demand forecasting. And it boils down to essentially to uncertainty quantification. Businesses, especially in times like these, they want to quantify uncertainty, understand basically how the market is going to react, try and simulate certain conditions in order to respond better to them, to make sure that they have, if it comes to retaining stock, that they retain the most profitable, most efficient stock that turns over very quickly, rather than holding stock that remains in their warehouses for a long time and obviously loses value. Yeah. But also it applies to clients who provide services. So it's very important. I'm glad we're having this chat today.
Yeah, and I personally find it quite interesting. I think the people that know me personally, I know that I've got quite a large inner geek within me. And so I like talking about things that are just a little bit more technical. Because actually, when you start digging into the technical aspects of it, it's actually not that technical. It's actually quite logical, but it's not that technical. It's basically common sense, a lot of this. And that's why we sort of selected you to work with a couple of our clients, is because those clients, those chief execs require, and one of them is a transformation director, they require common sense, and I think that really does help. Does your analytical background help with that?
Absolutely. It does, and sometimes it works against it. So as a logical, so as a logical kind of approach, you tend to kind of sometimes get bogged down in the details, and obviously my stakeholders, they care about the details, but not the technical ones. They want something that is explainable, something that makes sense, something that they can feel confident with, and that there's always a balancing act with methodologies, with approaches that I take. I have to always think with the business in mind. How will the business react to this particular approach, to this particular methodology? And sales forecasting, as you say, it's in a nutshell, it's simple mathematics. It's not. It can be complex, but it depends on your stakeholders' understanding and confidence in that complexity. If they're comfortable with very advanced techniques, then sure, go ahead and use that. But also kind of think, I always like to think with my end users in mind, how will they react to that particular solution and that particular, will it deliver value for them in the short term?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point when you talk about key stakeholders. I mean, the key stakeholders that you deal with are either the sales director, the growth director, the chief exec, or sometimes the investor, which could be private equity. And that probably brings us. I should also remind people that there's a difference between contractors and interim managers. And for interim managers, which is what we supply, we supplied you in there as an interim manager, which means board influencing. You know, this is not a contracting come in and, you know, do the role. Yes, you have to do that in a very hands-on way, but the stakeholder engagement piece is critical, isn't it, for your role?
Certainly, and it's very important to have that trust and build that relationship early on, because there's no point in continuing that engagement if you lose the trust. So it's important as an interim manager to come in and show how you can deliver value and take everyone on board and try and influence and have stakeholders at the client speak with each other and agree with each other on the direction, because there's no point in kind of losing that relationship. So that's why it's all about building trust, and try and be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think every chief exec that I work with will always say the same thing, is that tell me the truth. I just want the truth. I can deal with the truth. What I can't deal with is something that's not very transparent. So yeah, I'd second what you say. Can we talk about when you go into an organization, because you have this sort of both hands-on and holistic ability, or people call it strategy, but you have this ability to do both at the same time. But let's say for instance, you walk into an organization, a couple of 100 million turnover, missing its numbers, maybe not by loads, but you can see that there's some kind of pattern starting to form. And the chief exec knows that this pattern exists because, one, they might see it on data, but more importantly, they feel it. I mean, they genuinely feel it in their gut. How do you approach this when you start working with that particular customer?
Well, like we always say, it depends. It would depend on the kind of the data maturity of that business. Sometimes there's a gut feeling, but there's no data to back that. And me as an analytical person, I have to kind of provide proof and evidence from data. If that data doesn't exist, then we obviously kind of put a data roadmap in place so that we can work towards having that data maturity down the line. It doesn't have to be a year, it doesn't have to be many months. It could just be just maybe perhaps a quarter. So we can build up some data, some concrete evidence, and we can extrapolate from that. We can simulate some interactions from that. Yeah. But sometimes it depends. The data is there. Then the kind of we look at what is the most impactful solution that I can put in place in order to deliver those results for the stakeholder, and that can mean engaging with the business, engaging with the right department in order to quantify my analysis. So you do some you carry out your analysis and you identify some key issues or key aspects that either agree with or negate what the senior stakeholder is thinking, and therefore you have to take them on board and you have to kind of understand why that is. So kind of if I might steer that conversation towards some examples. So for example, when we talk about how that applies to forecasting, so naturally one of the kind of most common pricing exercises that I carry out are for the purposes of budgeting and planning for the next financial year. And normally there are some judgmental or kind of, I would say, qualitative aspects of the forecast that are being put in place by heads of departments or stakeholders for that number. But usually when I come in, I try and take a more quantitative approach. So try and use statistical forecasting in order to project what those numbers will be. I don't necessarily have to discount or kind of ignore what has been done. I usually take that on board and use that as input for the financial figures. So I always kind of try and take that gut feel that the stakeholder has, that knowledge. I build that into the forecast in order to kind of produce something that is perhaps more representative of the business.
Yeah.
And that is usually my approach.
That's really interesting, because I think when we speak to leaders sometimes, they don't understand how they can translate the gut feel into something like a sales forecast. They know it should be in there, and most of the time they are 100% correct. You don't build this gut feeling and then ignore it. So, it's encouraging to know that, even someone from a data science perspective, you can start looking at external factors and you can start looking at internal factors, and you start adding in the gut feel of the leadership into those sales forecasts to make sure that, one, they're accurate, but second, you've got buy-in from the leadership team that they're being heard.
Absolutely right. And I think it would be naive to come in and say, you've been doing this process manually, let's stop doing that. I know your business better than you. That would become like completely arrogant and naive. So it's there is in mathematics there are definitely methods that allow you to build in that sort of user knowledge and user experience to provide that as input, and even to weigh it to a certain extent, so you can underweight or overweight in order just by how sure you can be, and you can quantify basically that manual projection. You can quantify it to see how reflective it is of past experiences, and you can just put your put a confidence basically tag on it. You say this judgment is 90% correct of 90% of the time correct, or kind of close. So you can put that judgment sticker on it, and you can embed additional layers of statistics on top of that to produce something that is that lifts up the accuracy to a substantial level.
That's so interesting. And again, might be my inner nerd coming out, but I can see sort of two real applications that would interest me as a chief exec. One would be just purely to test if I've got it right. The gut feel, all the macroeconomic factors, things like that, the things that I've read about in the press, what my sales team are telling me, things like that. I've got a good feel that my numbers are correct. Actually, I'm going to test myself. I'm going to bring someone like you in just under my remit and say, can you prove what I'm thinking is correct? And just see. I mean, that for me would be quite interesting.
It is indeed. And it's the nice kind of obviously the geek in me likes to do to build the algorithms and the models behind this, but also the kind of as you can imagine, the consultant in me, the kind of the artist in me wants to showcase that. You want to kind of, because you want to visualize that. So you have these scenario planners that are usually kind of built in a front-end application. And I show to the senior stakeholders, you have all of these inputs and you have these levers you can just move based on your judgment, and you can see in real time based on past data. So I take past data, apply the judgments to it, the kind of the theories behind those judgments, and show them in real time whether they work or not. So they can actually, you can influence them. You can, if they are wrong, they will see that they are wrong and they will kind of correct themselves. But if they're right, then you've provided concrete proof that they're right to the entire business, and obviously you get some reward out from that.
Yeah,
it's rewarding.
I mean, the second way I'd think about it as a chief exec, again, to sort of have fun with this. Fun, I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe not in this context. But if I'm, let's say, private equity ownership, and private equity, it varies how much stress they're going to put onto a business, how much pressure they're going to put onto a business based on the overall fund value and fund exit and things like that. But the business itself is going to be under pressure probably at the moment because soft sales numbers are more common than not. So wouldn't it be great to be a chief exec into the meeting and you're putting together your sales forecast, you present that through to the private equity ownership, and the private equity ownership, who very often have got some good skills in this space as well and have a good gut feel themselves as an operating partner, say, actually, I'm not sure about that number because I think of this factor and I think of this factor and I think of this factor. Wouldn't it be great as a chief exec to either say, yes, we've built in that, let me show you, and then you can prove to them, or that's a great point, Mr. Operating Partner. What we're going to do is we're going to blend that into the sales forecast, and we're going to prove your theory, but it may disprove your theory. Are you okay with that? No operating partner is going to say no. And therefore you can then come and say, look, this is conclusive now. We've taken into consideration your comments, and this is how they've either have a positive or a potential negative effect. Interesting.
It is absolutely, and it's kind of it brings to my mind another aspect of forecasting. So when I forecast, it's not about providing a point estimate. I also provide an uncertainty range, or kind of a confidence interval, as you will, what we call it in statistics, or sometimes it's called predictive intervals. Used interchangeably mean two things if you want to look at technically, but so this is quite important to kind of produce with the forecast, because it shows you best case, worst case. You can have fun with that range of forecast, and you can understand, okay, what is the worst case performance, and you can probably use that to mitigate certain risks. And it works from both ways, from either side, whether you're on the private equity side or if you're from the business side. If you'd have that data that can back you up and provide you with a kind of a holistic understanding of where you're projected, where your sales are projected.
Well, I think as well, like anything, if I was the chief exec, I want to be in front of this, not behind it. So what I mean by that is that I'd want to bring in someone like you to do this for us, and given scenario 2, where you can then start having this active conversation with the operating partner, rather than the operating partner saying, I'm going to bring someone in who's going to do this for us, which then makes the chief exec go, oh, that means potentially I've got a problem. And I think Absolutely. I'd rather be in front of it than behind it, wouldn't you?
I definitely would. And it also kind of, perhaps maybe if you're considering going that route of having discussions and negotiations with B, maybe B's, perhaps you'd bring somebody in to have a look at that and look at help you zoom in on certain performances in order to understand where you're falling short, essentially, where you might be falling short, where there might be certain aspects of your business that could be underperforming and might be an issue in that discussion. So you could probably hold off, build that, make some improvements, and go back with a strong foot, basically.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you. I think in terms of the conversation that we're going to have for this podcast was around sales forecasting. And I think what you've done is you've given us a really good understanding of how to forecast pragmatically, but also how to do that with confidence. Before we close this off, it's worthwhile mentioning that we're about to do a second podcast recording that's going to move from sales forecasting into profitability. And I think it might be worthwhile, if people enjoyed this podcast, to look out for the second podcast. That particular podcast title is going to be about enhancing profitability through price and segmentation. So if you've enjoyed this, please look out for the second one. But Ali, thank you very much for your time for this one, sir. I think you've made sales forecasting a lot more interesting than what a lot of people think sales forecasting is. And I'd only encourage people to engage with you to talk more about this, which is both a fascinating subject and quite an exciting subject, but a subject that's very topical right now.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.